And I'll start with Chintan. We know that this is a decade of action, and we already see a lot of traction towards clean energy, be it solar, be it wind. And now we're also looking at the combination of solar, wind, and battery storage. And a lot of investment is flowing in this direction. And we see that government has actually taken a very intentional decision to invest at the same time leverage private capital in this, in these particular sectors. So clearly, we see a lot of traction because the government has also shown a lot of seriousness in clean energy, clean mobility. There are policy mechanisms that have been introduced. There are subsidies that are available, incentives available for startups in these particular sectors. Chintan, if you could share from your experience, what are the key trends that you see, particularly for clean energy in the renewable energy sector, that you see emerging in this decade that will benefit the MSMEs, or the vision is there where SMEs are included in the clean energy vision of the country? Could you share some of your perspectives on it?
Sure. As I was I just pointed out, you have about 9 million SMEs registered with the Government of India, and about 15% of those SMEs have a connected load of about 200 to 500 kilowatts of electricity. Now, the problem with them is today that they can't avail normal mainstream financing. That's a problem. So we are talking about those SMEs which are essentially manufacturing entities. And then there are new SMEs that are coming up who would like to be purely energy play SME. For example, you have the compressed biogas projects coming up in India. These are small size projects. And what we have seen till now, or rather from my experience and all, is unfortunately they can't commit documentation, which is needed as per the regulations prescribed by RBI, and which are essentially implemented by shadow banks like IREDA or even banks together. So somehow, if we can look into this particular aspect and how we can essentially mainstream those, and one of the options can be a lease finance model, because almost every SME does pay electricity bill from the distribution company. So, and the problem with most of the SMEs is, the amount of investment they have to do in solar or into a RE project would be like 25 to 30% of the net worth, which would not make a sense on its own. So an ideal case would be a lease finance model, but essentially a lease rental will be lesser than the electricity bills. So they can essentially reduce the energy cost on one side and also create asset on the other side. And most of these assets would be, the money would be recovered in about 7 to 8 year period. So that means for a 25-year project life for a solar project, you essentially pay off the entire cost in 7 to 8 years, and may be more, what I would say is competitive and profitable. And essentially, when you have adequate surplus available, you will just expand your industrial operations. Yeah, that's what I would like to say here.
Thanks. Just building on that, you said that we could look at lease finance model for the MSMEs. However, I think one of the things that I keep hearing, a lot of workshops that we have organized in the past with financial institutions, when we were implementing a few projects with USAID for financial institutions, is that the moment they look at the risk profile of an MSME, even for a lease finance model, their risk profile needs to be fairly good, and they need to be a low risk MSME, which tends to be a challenge for, at least for the MSMEs who really need finance. And it ends up being, the paradox is that the SMEs that don't need the finance they are able to prove that they need finance, and they can get finance because of their low risk profile. So from your experience specifically with IREDA and the kind of projects that get funded, are there any examples that you think, or models that you think can be replicated for the MSME sector? It could probably be aggregating the demand from the MSMEs and putting together maybe a consortium of MSMEs that are able to raise more money, for projects that are sizable. Ticket size matters a lot for a lot of times for the lenders, because they wouldn't want to bother for a small size project. So from your experience with the radar, what do you think can be really replicated for MSMEs to ensure that there's more clean energy adoption, clean tech adoption?
Actually, that's a very good question that you raised, or the point that you raised. You already have a credit guarantee fund trust for MSME, which is by the government of India, which is ranging from 10 lakhs onwards till 2 crores. So essentially, the government of India gives you a counter guarantee for a collateral-free loan for SME. That's there. The scheme is available, and the current year's allocation is about 23,000 crores, if I'm not mistaken. But the problem that lies with most of the mainstream bankers is when you are a banker at a branch level, you have a target, and the target can be easily met through housing finance, to vehicular finance, to personal loans, and maybe something from CGTS. So this is just not the priority. That's it, I would say. The elements are there, enablers are there, the market is there. It's just, somebody needs to just push it. There's a nudge required to ensure that this financing happens. And I think that's what is needed. Yeah, that's how I would say.
Chintan, I have some difficult questions that I would like to pose.
Sure.
We all know that energy efficiency is a no-brainer. Clean energy is already established. A lot of finance is already flowing in that direction. But unless we are able to bring the breakthrough technologies like green hydrogen or carbon capture to not just getting demonstrated, but also be scaled up in India, it's going to be very difficult to decarbonize the hard to abate sectors or the subsectors, even within the automobile supply chain. The foundry, for example, and the steel that gets used. So a lot of carbon footprint sits within the materials that are used in automobiles. There is also movement now where we want to electrify our mobility. A lot of electric vehicles are getting manufactured, both to enhance electrification of the public mobility, at the same time the private vehicles. But we see the challenges again lie, when we talk about demonstrating technologies like green hydrogen, or even getting more batteries built in India. And I think clean energy is critical, of course, for even the green hydrogen technology for green hydrogen to be produced at scale. We need more clean energy, more electrolyzers. From IREDA's work, do you see there's vision for these kind of technologies, the breakthrough technologies? Because that is going to really decide how soon India is able to decarbonize. It's not just the clean energy or energy efficiency, but breakthrough technologies like green hydrogen, carbon capture. So is there a vision within IREDA, and is there a plan for bringing these technologies to be demonstrated and then deployed?
Suresh, particularly green hydrogen has a minimum economies of scale. SMEs are ruled out. But let me be very, very frank about it, because the minimum size that you can actually look for green hydrogen is like something like 300,000 kgs of hydrogen per year, or 1 million ton of ammonia. If you're thinking below that, it's a suicidal attempt, because that's how the market for the hydrogen operates.
Right.
And we're talking about a 1 million ton of ammonia, you're talking about 35,000 crores of investments. So that's definitely not SME.
Right.
But what SMEs can get into is essentially into manufacturing of electrolyzer and the components, which are equally important. Because, I mean to say, when you look at green hydrogen, you require the RE source, which is happening on its own in India in terms of manufacturing. You require Haber's process for manufacturing ammonia or maybe methane reformation. And the most critical part of the hydrogen economy happens to be electrolyzer. That's where I think the SME has a role to play, essentially in terms of manufacturing of components of electrolyzer or electrolyzer itself. And that's where I would say that SME would play a role, because electrolyzer happens to be the critical component, and essentially the costing particular for electrolyzer would get reduced if SME sector gets into it. That's what I would say. But otherwise, hydrogen is not actually gelling with SME sector very clearly. Let me be very, very frank about it.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Chintan. Just building on, again, the kind of instruments that are now emerging. And with ESG, we see there's an emergence of a lot of investors now aligning their portfolios and their credit lines to make sure that the companies that they are funding are performing well on the ESG metrics. And ESG is something that all the big businesses are now trying to come to terms with, and they're all setting their frameworks, their KPIs. SMEs, I see, are kind of lagging behind in that. And although SEBI has not mandated SMEs on the ESG criteria yet, but sooner or later, I do think that the investors are going to look at making sure that their portfolio is decarbonized, or their portfolio is not including any carbon-intensive industry. So they again tend to lose out with frameworks like ESG coming in. And very similarly, even the green bonds that are now, where the government is actually raising huge capital. Do you see any any mechanisms where we can make sure that the MSMEs don't lose out? Very similarly, the carbon market, for example, with carbon market now opening up in India, we see a lot of big companies are going to benefit. At the same time, it's going to present challenges and opportunities for the big sectors. But again, we don't see a clear direction for the MSMEs to not lose out on these opportunities that are going to be presented by these new emerging trends. Any comments on that?
I think, Samir, when you're looking at green bonds as well as getting funds for the SME sector and all, we are looking at documentation and governance in SME, which definitely is lacking. Let me be very frank about it. And because of its sheer size, I mean to say, when you have a small size company, the type of governance and the documentation and the disclosure that you can do, which the large companies will do, SMEs can't do. That's a fact. But there's a cost attached to it for all these things. And till that issue has been resolved, you can't actually get the funding for the SME the way the large industries can get. Having said so, I think we need to also create a window for financing for SME sector itself, because I mean to say, the basic fabric of SME can't change. That's a fact. And we have, as I told you, we have a massive number of SME sector registered with Government of India. So it's a sizable volume. And we need to essentially look at SME from a different microscope than you would look at from a large industry. Also on the ESG front, on the green bond front, I mean to say, from the any perspective. So I think that's where we need to evolve a different framework, essentially for the SME sector itself. Otherwise, I mean to say, SME can never be mainstreamed or got into the main fabric of the way things are happening on the ESG front and the green bond fronts here.